Tolo, your host, and welcome to the Dunamis EQ Leadership Podcast. We're here to empower you to lead yourself and others with emotional intelligence. Let's go. Bruce, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on. Yeah, so we just recorded for your podcast, had a really good time. So now we're going to flip around and you're going to be on mine. So I would love for you to introduce yourself to everyone that's listening.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, so happy to be here. It was really great talking to you on my podcast, which I am Bruce Alexander, and I am the host of Authentic on Air with Bruce Alexander. And my whole platform is that I'm a confident coward. I'm one who encourages everybody to speak up about their fears and lead with that first, and then let it allow you to be more authentic in your life. And the way I help encourage that is through my podcast and through authenticity and identity coaching. And some of that does involve leadership coaching whenever it aligns with the client's values. So
that's awesome. And I really love what you're doing in helping people to be their authentic selves, because I feel like that's something that people struggle with quite a lot. I'd love to know a bit about how you decided that that's what you were going to focus on in terms of coaching.
Yeah. So whenever I left my previous job, so I have to remember that we talked about some of this on my podcast, but This is a brand new audience. So I was a firefighter for almost 10 years, and in that job I'd been promoted several times, and I left as a major and a public risk reduction officer and a public educator. So I'd ascended pretty well, and I had gotten to a place to where I was doing very successful things, but receiving very negative feedback. And it became very difficult for me to continue with what I was doing. So it eventually came to, I left the fire department, and I allowed the opportunities that I've had over the last 20 years in different careers to shape my experience. And what I've learned is all the problems I ever had in working for anybody or having any relationships started with me trying to be somebody I wasn't. And that important key takeaway was what I decided to build my business off of, is how much joy I felt in my life once I started to be authentic, and once I started to love myself and put that out into the world for others to accept me. And I wanted to help anybody and everybody do that who wanted to. And the coaching part of it is one part, but the podcast is another part that I initially created as a lead gen tool, but almost immediately it became something that was so much more important to me to just help put something out in the world that provided a space for people to accept themselves authentically and to really just love themselves.
Have you had any feedback so far about the podcast from your listeners?
From people I don't know, not really, except for the people who've come on the show who have been so great about telling me that they love the space that I'm creating. They appreciate the space, that for them, I've actually had a couple of different feedback where it has changed the way that they move forward in their lives. And that was really powerful to me to have. I had a Fox News anchor, which in America is, one of the, it wasn't national Fox News. It's one of the local different national syndicates. He's an anchor for the evening news, and he told me that our conversation was integral in changing the way his leadership style was, because wow. I encouraged him to stand up and create a space for people who didn't look like him, and to ask questions that encouraged them to be able to be themselves. And he was like, I'd never thought about it that way. I'd always just thought if I led by example and, was a good person, then I was doing my job. But you challenged me to actually actively speak to that and set an example by being, this is a white man, by being a white man who's willing to actually stand up for these principles and not just act like I stand up for them, but to actually, vocalize that.
That's amazing, because I really enjoyed being on, and I think the questions that you ask definitely help you to understand authenticity and know what that looks like practically. So I agree with everybody else. It's a really amazing space that you're creating, and I know it's going to help a lot of people. what I wanted to ask you about was, you said about, you were doing what you felt was the right things, but you were getting kind of bad feedback. What was that like? Would you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I found is, so especially whenever I got away from like being an active firefighter in the field, and I got into the place where I got promoted twice in one summer, did really great because our
Wow.
promotional system was it's test based to promote to what's called lieutenant or driver. I guess my other English friend who's a firefighter told me that you guys call it lieutenant there, which is crazy to me. Um, Shout out to Daisy Goldsmith. It's my homie. Um, that it's all test based. So you just get all these books and you have to basically memorize them in a short amount of time and be able to prove that you can do that. And then I had an interview process to become promoted to a risk reduction officer and a public educator, and I did that, and that was all in one summer, and that was an amazing thing. I was doing really well on that aspect, and then I also got with that came doing a lot of presentations. So what I found was that everybody I presented to loved me. So the forward facing, the client, I did absolutely great with. It was the people who I had to work with on a day-to-day basis who had complaints about me. They didn't like the way that I worked as a team. They said I wasn't a good team member because I didn't rely on other people. I didn't do things the way that they did them. Whenever I put out that I needed assistance and they wouldn't help me, I wouldn't throw a fit about it. I would just go do it myself. And I was told that I was being a lone wolf, or I wasn't working well with the team. And what I didn't understand was, to me, that they weren't working well with me. I'd asked for help and nobody was showing up. But there were channels in place where you kind of do things a specific way in the fire department. If you put something out and it's not done, you run it up the chain of command. And I wasn't doing that part, because to me, it felt like I was being a burden to others whenever I asked for help once. So asking twice was so uncomfortable for me. I felt like that wasn't I don't know, it made me feel bad, like, and scared and fearful, so I didn't want to do it. And that's whenever I was running from that feeling a lot. So that was one of those places where I was running into being inauthentic was causing me strife at my job. Because if I had said, "Hey chief, I'm asking for these things and I'm not getting the help I need. Can you help me get that done?" He would have put things into place to make sure that they got done. That would have solved a lot of problems, because I got the early on, my first year doing this as a public educator and a risk reduction officer, I got the opportunity to run our 501c3, our charity fundraiser, to raise money for smoke alarms in people's homes. Great opportunity, but it was setting up a 5K from scratch and doing something I'd never done, setting up an event for 1,000 people with basically no information. Because the person who had previously done it had promoted out of the job, was no longer there. The person before that had retired. Everybody who had done this had moved out, and people who had been part of it were still part of the team, but nobody who'd ever run it. So nobody who was on the team actually understood what it took to set it up. They just said, "It all just comes together, man. You got to relax. You're going too hard. It all just comes together." And I'm like, "No, we need to set up committees. We need to do this." Like, that's not how we do it. What we do is this and that. And basically they said, what we do is we let the person who leads it run it themselves. And that's what I heard. So I ran with that, and I ran it myself, and it was a success. It did great. What I heard whenever we did a debrief with my team was, "Here's how you failed as a team member. Like, yeah, you did great. The event went off without a hitch. It's the best one we've ever had." Now, they literally called me into a room of what we called the rig room, the big, like, storeroom. Everybody in my team sat down, 9 people, and they all went around and told me how I failed.
Wow.
That was the leadership style I was dealing with. It wasn't, "Hey man, congratulations on a great event. Let's work on this part next time." It was, "Yeah, whenever you did this, that really pissed me off. And, you could do this and this and this better." And I'm like, okay. I thought I did really great. The numbers are better than they've ever been. Like, we literally raised $25,000 more than we had raised the years previous. And I was getting chastised. I did not understand this. So I was questioning whether I was even never going to get to do it again, because I loved it, and I did something good. I enjoyed what I was doing. I was raising money for a great cause. I was getting to be a salesman with a product that I completely believed in. And then I got chastised. So I was like, well, and they said, when you do this next year, I was like, so I do get to do it next year. Yes, but you have to, we're going to give you this other guy on our team is going to be your co-coordinator. That meant that somebody else was going to be there to take the credit. And he literally did nothing towards supporting me as coordinator of that race. Once again, did everything, went fantastic, but I learned that you just have to tell people more about what you're doing so they basically can co-sign you with the stamp of approval and not do anything. That was very frustrating for me. Like, I didn't want all the... Go ahead.
I was going to ask, do you think that's a general culture thing in terms of the fire department, or do you think that you see that in terms of the people that you coach? Do you see that as quite a common thing that happens in a lot of organizations?
I know in the fire department is very, very, like, the culture in the fire department is very specific and toxic, in my opinion. There's a lot of do all the work, ask for none of the credit. Not only don't ask for the credit, don't receive the credit. Like, we do what we do because it's our job, and we run into houses when people are running away. Like, that's the kind of brainwashing mentality you have to go through to do such a dangerous job. And then once you leave the field, they expect you to still do things thanklessly. And I didn't mind doing it thanklessly. I just didn't want to have to report to somebody else to tell me how to do what I was doing right, to basically knock me down a peg before I even was out of the gate. And that's something that I do feel like is common in multiple different aspects of American culture specifically, especially when dealing with minorities, is that we had to make sure that you don't get too high on the hog. And that is something that I found difficult to deal with. But as you talked about and when you interviewed with me today, is that you have to learn how to play the game. And it's an unfortunate part of life, but there are aspects of that being a coach now that I would coach myself through differently. I would coach myself in how to both honor myself and respect the fact that I work within a system, and that if I want to be successful in this system, there are certain things that you have to do. And it's not sacrifice yourself completely, but you do have to meet certain benchmarks. And if you can't meet those, then maybe you should find something else to do.
I think that's a really tough balance that I think a lot of people struggle with, is how do I still be true to myself but also meet the benchmarks? I think, to be honest, part of it is, am I in a culture that fits? Right? So am I working in an organization where my true self is actually welcome? So do our values align? Because there are some companies that, for example, are super hierarchical, which isn't good. It's not bad. It kind of it is what it is. There are some companies that are super flat. But if I'm a hierarchical person, so for example, I'm Nigerian, we're quite hierarchical in terms of age and respect and things like that. So I don't mind hierarchical cultures. But if I'm someone who's come from quite a flat culture and then I go into a hierarchical one, the fit isn't quite right. It's not that I'm good or I'm bad. It's not that the company is good or bad. It's just that we don't fit. So I think it really comes down to, are you in a place where who you are at the core of you also matches what that company stands for?
And with the fire department, it's what's called paramilitary. So it takes that hierarchical and takes it one step further to the chain of command, in which the chain of command is absolute. Like, you do not go above your station to talk to somebody above your direct superior unless it is in an absolute emergency or like there is some major wrong being done. Otherwise, you follow the proper channels. And for me, it wasn't just about me having come from a much flatter culture in restaurant industry, which is what I mostly did before I got into the fire department, but also as an ADHD person, following specific procedure can be difficult whenever I see a better way to do it. And so whenever it came to communicating outside of our specific organization, I sometimes would think I would obfuscate the chain of command because I knew a person. It's like, I can get this done if I talk to so-and-so. And so and so and I were somebody who we were associates, but unfortunately, whenever it came to acting through the fire department, that always came back to my boss. So if I talked to like city legal, I was like, hey, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. City legal would tell their boss, and their boss would talk to my boss and say, hey, why is your guy over here asking questions about this? Why didn't you call me?
Mm.
And then he would come down on me and it's like, why are you making me look bad? Why are you, there's a chain of command for a reason. It was really hard for me to get that because it's like, there's a simple way to do this. Like everything takes 9 months in the fire department because we have to go through all this bureaucracy. Let me talk to my guy, let his guy talk to their guy, and let's get it done.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I talked to my guy, and then his guy, who would be, equal to my boss's boss, would say, that's not how you do things. And, sometimes that is not a good fit. Me running to constantly like, that's not how you do things was not a good
Mm.
fit. And I would change the way I did it now, but then it was really hard for me to step outside of myself and see, hey, you've got to play the game if you want to succeed here. Like I was all about lightning fast progress, and the fire department is about turtle speed progress. And I was told that early on, and I couldn't hear it because it wasn't in a way that was caring or beneficial. That it was said to me, it was like, slow down. Like it's not, what you're doing is not going to work. And I just couldn't hear that,
Mm. Mm. It sounds like I said, it was just a misfit, in terms of your approach, in terms of, I love to get stuff done. I love to get stuff done quickly. And in some of those environments where it is quite hierarchical military, it is going to be quite tough. I wanted to ask you a slightly random question because you mentioned about how in the fire department you run into burning buildings when people are running out. What does it actually feel like to run into a burning building?
So by the time that you actually do it on a scene, you've trained so much to where it doesn't even feel weird. Like it's not even a thought. You're just you turn off your mind and rely on your training because
Wow.
you're systematically introduced to these you know to outside people terrifying situations, but like we started doing live fire training as a recruit. Like that's something that you do where you go into a structure that is burning and you just sit in there and you get used to being next to fire. So by the time you're actually doing it, it's exhilarating. It's exciting. You're like, yes, we finally get to do what we were trained to do. Like, I mean, no, you would be surprised the way that people sit around
Yeah.
and when the fire alarm kicks off, the excitement that happens. It's like, yes, ooh, but somebody's house is burning down. Like that is like it is somebody's worst day, and people get pissed off whenever. And when I went to public education, we were doing our job well enough, and the fires were not happening as often. That's what made sense to me. Is like I want to fight fire whenever it's necessary, but I don't want to ever be excited about it because that's somebody's house that is burning. That's somebody's worst day, and people took that as me being afraid of fire because the culture was so toxic. It was like if you aren't excited to go fight fire, then you're scared. I care. I don't want to call down fire upon people so I can go chase my adrenaline.
Yeah.
No, it's like I want to do it when it's time to do it, but outside of that, like I'd
Mm.
rather not fight fire and know that people are safe.
Mm.
But it was fun for a while. Then you've done it a few times and you get older and your body starts to wear on you because it is a tough physical job. And I'm not a small person, so it wore on me pretty hard. And you're
Mm.
wearing 75 pounds of gear. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, it's like, yeah, I'd rather not. I'd rather not
Mm.
catch a fire today. I'd rather just stay in the house and make medical calls when we have to, and not have to go do a 6 hour hard labor fire.
Wow. It's the kind of thing that for me is so far away from what I would ever do in my day-to-day life, where like I work with computers. There is no danger other than my laptop overheating. So it's
Yeah.
so interesting to hear from the perspective of someone that's actually done it. It's so fascinating.
Well, what's funny is like part of the reason why I think it didn't line up with my it wasn't a good fit was because I was never meant to be a firefighter. My father did it,
Mm.
and he kept
Wow.
hammering it at me. Like I avoided doing it for 10 years. I was almost 30 whenever I got on the job because I did not want to do that. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. Then I had a kid, and it started to sound kind of good. Then I had another kid, and it started to sound really good. And then we had our third child, and I was like, I'm not making enough to provide for my family. Here's an obvious solution. Go be a firefighter. And as a career, as a financial move, it was the smartest thing I ever did, because I was able to secure a financial future for my family for a time, but I couldn't even dream of being in a spot where I am now before the fire department. It gave me the ability to see the future, like see into the future what it could look like. I couldn't even dream, because things were so financially tight before I got to the fire department, and it provided that for me. So I'm definitely thankful for the opportunity to do it for a while. But if you don't look a certain way, and you're not a certain kind of fit, and you're not if you're not one of the good old boys, the culture it's a strain on you. And I don't wish that upon anybody, but for some people, it's the best job in the world. It was a good job for a time for me.
That makes sense. What does leadership mean to you?
Oh man, that's funny. Like I asked the question of what does authenticity mean to you, and I never really think about how people are going to take that question. And now you're asking me leadership, and like I know what it is, but then like, how do I define it? So leadership to me is stepping into the role of being a good example to whomever it is in the situation and owning it. And to me, leadership is really about putting other people before yourself. It's about putting something above you, whether it's the team or your family or the job, whatever it is you were trying to lead. It's about saying, this comes first. I'm not important here. I mean, you are important, but you're not the thing. The thing is whatever the thing is, and leadership is committing to that process and trying to really be a intermediary to make sure that runs as smoothly and efficiently as possible.
And do you think everybody can be a leader?
Oh, absolutely. Everybody could be a leader. Now, does it mean that everybody can be as they are? No. I don't think that everybody can be as they are. Sometimes you have to make changes. Some people don't have the humility to be good leaders. And I mean, I guess everybody can be a leader. Can everybody be a good leader? Not as they are. Some people are naturally gifted with humility and the ability to appreciate others. Some people don't have that. And I think that is such an integral part to what I call authentic leadership. It is being able to look at yourself first and say, here's how I'm weak. What do I need my team to do to help, cover my weaknesses, and how can I use my team, utilize them best to leverage their strengths to cover my weaknesses. And I think that utilization part is such an important part of leadership that gets overlooked, because a lot of people think that being a leader is trying to do it all yourself or show everybody how it's done all the time. I mean, the only thing that you should be showing everybody how it's done all the time is listening. That's the thing that you need to model more than anything else, is listening and observing, watching other people who can do it right. Those things I think are so important.
I love that in terms of modeling how to listen, because I think sometimes as leaders, there's this pressure that it's like you have to know what to do all the time. And I don't feel like that's actually true. I think you have to know how to get things done, but you don't have to know how to do it, if that makes sense. So absolutely. You have to be able to ask questions. You have to be able to hear answers. You have to be able to kind of figure things out. And I think that's really what makes good leaders, is being able to figure stuff out with your team that you never would be able to figure out by yourself.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that a big part of leadership is knowing who you're responsible to and knowing who you're responsible for. Like, for example, if you're part of a corporate team, you're responsible to your supervisor and your shareholders, right? They have an objective that they want to see your team get done. Know that objective, and then they don't care how the sausage is made. They don't care if you did it all by yourself or if you utilize your team. But it is important that you're understanding that you're responsible for your team and keeping them happy and engaged in the process is going to ultimately produce the best result. And I think the best way of doing that is utilizing the skills that people both enjoy doing and the ones that they're good at. And if they don't enjoy what they're good at, getting their buy-in to understand that them being good at that thing makes the whole team better, and that's something that they can enjoy. Sometimes you have to make that sell. That can be a tough thing at times whenever you have somebody who's so good at this part of it, but they don't like to do that. But you have to teach sacrifice as part of being a team, but not to the way it's like, well, you don't need to be happy. It's like, yes, we want you to be happy. We want to care about you, because let's talk about care. Having genuine caring for your team, I think is the start of being a leader. Like I believe strongly in heart-led leadership. I think that you talk about a lot on your show, emotional quotient, being open to love your team, love them as people, get to know them, know when they're off. Like if you know your team and something is off, you'll know immediately, versus it being 3 months down the road whenever somebody has not been carrying their weight and it's too late for you to fix it. On the first day, you're like, hey, something's wrong with Todd. What's going on? And you immediately, you care about them. So you're like, hey, Todd, what's going on? How can something I can do for you? No, there's nothing you can do, but I appreciate you asking. I appreciate you caring about me. And all of a sudden their performance picks up just immediately because you asked, just because you cared. And so, yeah, I kind of got off on a little bit of a tangent there because the caring part I think is so important.
Tangents are good as a general thing on here, because I think there's something really important in what you said, because I had a manager who, he pulled me into a room one day and he was like, Tolly, you've lost your mojo. He's like, what's going on? Like, you're usually like this, you've been like this, like, what's going on? And I didn't know that I'd lost my mojo. But when he said it to me, it resonated with me. So I was like, that's what it is. Like, I knew something wasn't, but he's like, you've lost your mojo. And then we kind of put a plan together in terms of, okay, what are some of the things that I can do to get it back? And it was so important to me. It was a pretty pivotal moment. And he was brave in calling me into the room and saying, look, you're not yourself. What's going on? He wasn't accusing me. He wasn't angry with me. He was just like, you're not being you. Like, what is going on? And that made a massive difference to me. So I think you're so right. Like, if you know your team, you can spot those problems before they become massive, massive problems.
Yeah. And something that you said there is, I think, so important to that process is that it was clear to you that he wasn't accusing you of anything. You weren't being admonished. You weren't being punished. Like, in my experience, I think people have tried to access this piece, but they've done it in a way which feels like admonishment. They call you into the office. They're sitting there behind the desk. So you immediately feel like you're getting in trouble. Like if you go into your boss's office and they're sitting behind the desk, immediately you're defensive, right? You're not gonna be open to what they're gonna say as a person seeking out help. You're gonna want to just fix the problem and say, I'm sorry, boss. Yeah, I'm sorry. And that immediately shuts down open communication. So what I suggest is, whenever you notice somebody's performance is off, you don't set an appointment. It's an informal thing. You say, hey, Todd, come back to my office with me real quick. And so then you're both up. You enter the room together. You sit next to him if there's an open chair. Make sure there's enough space so you're not being a close talker, but turn the chair towards him and be like, hey, man, what's going on? Are you okay? Like, sound like somebody who actually cares. Like, would you ever sit across from your wife across the desk and say, come in, have a seat?
Yeah.
What's going on with you today? Like,
no.
Oh, my wife would be like, she'd run out of the room. She's like, I don't want this conversation. I'm out.
Yeah.
So I think about somebody you care about whenever you're having that conversation. And hopefully through practice, you actually get used to having conversations with care with your team. And I think that's something it's different, and it's a little, it might be a little woo-woo for some people, but for me, I think it's so important to care beyond the end result with your team, like to actually have an actual care for your team.
I think what you said about it might be a bit woo-woo, and I think that's a bit of the stigmatism that comes with some of the things around emotional intelligence, around authentic leadership, is that it feels a bit too fuzzy for some people. But I think that in that like fuzziness in quotes is where actual real connection happens. It's where real care comes from. It's where people really get to the core issues and proper bonds are made. Because I think that there's a bit of a backlash at the moment around, people saying like this work environment is like family. But I think that for me, like that's actually what I felt with my work people, is that these are like my family. I spend 40 hours a week at least with you. Like this is more time than I spend with my family. So there is something about that, I care for you deeply like my family, that I found really important in creating a good environment.
And I completely agree with that 100%. It is saying it feels like family and it actually feeling like family, though, are two different things. Like the fire department was huge talking about it being a brotherhood, right? The fire department's a brotherhood. Well, whenever your brother tells you that you feel isolated, you don't double down on isolation and start making fun of that person and, hazing them. Like that's not a brotherhood. That is, it was a fraternity, sure. It felt like that, but it didn't feel like a brotherhood. And so I think that actually doing things like, not even like my family is not a great example. Like my family, my nuclear family is, but my parents and even my brother and I, we don't have the best relationship ever. Like I'd like to think of the ideal family, like the Cleavers. Like I want to think about that whenever I'm like, act like this is your family and actually care about people, actually take them into account when you make decisions. Don't just talk about it, like really do. And that's the kind of leadership that creates long-term longevity, that creates teams that like are excited about whatever it is you put in front of them. Like if your culture is exciting and is leading with a way that like with authentic leadership, everybody is going to love working together and love working with you no matter what you're working on. And that is going to create an atmosphere where those stakeholders and where your bosses are going to say, we can give them anything. We can put anything on that team's plate and they're going to knock it out of the park. And I think that's an awesome like place of power to sit in, to where you can say, hey, you guys are getting a little bored with this. Let's switch it up and see if we can take on this project. Like, I think we can do that. Like, let's set up ambitious goals. Let's go bigger. Let's go harder. And then they're going to say, absolutely, let's do it because we trust you. We know you care about us and you're not going to put us in a situation for us to fail.
I think you're right. It has to go both ways. The team has to have trust and the leadership has to have trust. It has to be both ways. Yeah. You'd mentioned earlier about ADHD. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey with that. How did you find out that you had that and how is that factored into leadership? And what are some of so how have you because what I want to understand is that earlier you mentioned when we were talking before about, part of it being that you get hyper focused on something, for example, which for me sounds almost counterintuitive because I know nothing about ADHD, but it sounds like that would be quite difficult. So I'd love to understand, what are some of the high points, what are some of the low points of that as well?
Sure. So I went through primary school, we call elementary school, middle school, and even secondary school with being the top of my class all throughout. But always there was an asterisk. He talks a lot. But I talked a lot, but I straight A's, crushed everything because I was just naturally smart. So I didn't need to pay attention in class. Part of it was the ADHD gives you the ability to multitask better at times than others. So it was like, if I was interested in a conversation that I was having, I was still picking up information from the teacher. So that was like, hey, I need you to shut up because you're making it so nobody else can focus. But for me, it was like, I'm getting the most information out of this right now because I'm enjoying the conversation and I'm also getting the background information. So I didn't realize I was ADHD until I got into college and I got tried for the first time. Like I went to the University of Oklahoma to start, and I went from being a straight A student and never needing to study to being a C student and having to learn how to study for the first time. And that rocked my world. I had no idea that, because people in high school had talked about spending all this time studying. My mom tried to make me study, and I was like, why? Why would I sit in a room and stare at this book for 3 hours? Like, I already know what's in it. This is stupid. Well, I didn't know what was in the books at college. So I didn't have the inside track to answer these questions. And I was just dumbfounded. And I was struggling at school for the first time in my life. And then also I was responsible for my own time. So I was late to class all the time. I was late to work all the time. And like all these things are piling up. And I was like, dude, like this is a lot. So I don't know how I eventually ended up going to the doctor. It might have been for something else, but I had mentioned this problem. I was like, I'm just like failing school for the first time and I'm struggling to be on time. They're like, I'm going to have you take this test. Had me take a test and they're like, so you're very ADHD. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought that because I was smart, that meant that I wasn't ADHD. That's a common misconception, is that you don't do well in school if you're ADHD. You don't do well focusing in school if you're ADHD, but you can still do well in school if you happen to be good at taking tests or intelligent or good at cheating. I don't know, whatever. Like I happen to do well, so I didn't realize that. But at the time, we only addressed the focusing in class and being late and losing chunks of time. Like that's all we addressed. So I didn't know anything about executive function. I didn't know anything about the social aspects of ADHD.
Sorry.
I didn't
What's
understand.
executive function?
So executive function is the part of your brain that says, I have this information up here of what to do, and I have this information of what actions I'm going to take in the back. Executive function usually connects those things in between. It says, yeah, I know that you want to do this, but the correct thing socially is to do this. I didn't have a very good bridge there. So as I became responsible for it, it's like, I know that I need to leave 20 minutes before the thing I need to be at. I know that. Absolutely know it. Every time I was leaving 2 minutes before I was supposed to be there. And I was like, and I didn't realize it ever until I got in the car and I'm like, how am I so late? Because I would walk around for 15 minutes just doing nothing, or saying like, I have time for this one more thing, because in my mind, I knew that this was not enough time to do the thing, but my actions wouldn't line up with that. So that's executive functioning in a very poorly explained way. There's a lot more to it. But I started to learn about that later on whenever I had a sit down with my boss about 6 months before I ended up leaving the fire department. I had gotten lots of different critiques throughout my different careers, and saying that we love, like, the work that you put out is really good, but you're not doing it fast enough. Like, we don't like the way that you're doing it, or like the result good, speed bad, or process they didn't like. And I never got that. I was like, what do you mean? Like, the thing is getting done. I could never really formulate what they wanted from me if the result was correct. And that was ADHD working through me without me knowing it, was that all I could see was the result. And there's a process that is fairly easy for people who are neuronormative, or are not.
Neurotypical, I think.
Yeah, neurotypical. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, who are neurotypical, it's easy for them. And for me, that process was not something I could even really grasp. So, and that also goes with social interaction. Is there's like a social dance where it's like, hey, how's the weather? Blah blah blah. You're talking about all the small talk as part of that social interaction process. That I see it, and when I try to do it, it reads as fake, because I'm trying to step through motions that I don't actually understand. So whenever I tried to be normal, it came off as being a fake person. So anyways, my boss sat down with me and said, like, the clients, which the clients isn't the word he used, but basically the clients, the public that you deal with, they love you. Like, you're doing a great job with that. But there's something missing with how you're operating as a team. And I'm like, okay, what do you want me to do? I need you to fix it. Okay, how? Like, be a better teammate. Okay, how? Do better. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like,
I don't know
I
how
want to
to.
do well.
Yeah.
Was that?
It's like, I don't know how to. Like, you have to help me to know how to do that.
And I didn't I did some research after that meeting to understand that ADHD was part of that missing piece that I was already supposed to have. And I didn't I thought I had mentioned it before, but I had never had a sit down conversation with him saying, I'm ADHD. That makes it hard for me to understand some of the normal social things that other people that might, you know, that you might just easily understand. So whenever I ask you to, like I told him whenever I first got there, I was like, please don't be subtle with me. Like, let me know if I'm doing something wrong as soon as you notice it and say it in big, loud words so I'm aware, or otherwise I won't pick up on the subtlety. And the fire department is really big about like testing you all the time before they give you the answers to the question. Or yeah, and you don't get to study. They're just like testing you, and you're like, oh, you failed, and then being subtle and like making comments. And I'm like, did I do something wrong? Like having failed a test that they didn't tell me that I was taking would
Yeah.
happen all the time because I didn't know that social piece of the puzzle that made it easy for others to just like act a certain way. I still
Mm.
struggle with it now, but now me saying like, hey, I'm ADHD, so if I don't get something that you're asking, it's because I don't operate, my brain doesn't operate the same that yours does. It's
Mm.
wired differently. So I'm gonna need
Mm.
you to break it down a different way. Like,
Mm.
because I want to perform well and I have the capabilities to perform well, but you're gonna have to lay out more specifically what you need me to do.
Mm.
So he didn't. He didn't lay it out very well. And I went forward not performing that way. And bitterness grew with my teammates. Uh they didn't like me. Not all of them. The one who sat directly next to me, we got along really well because I talked to him all the time about serious, important stuff. Because turns out he was also ADHD. So
Wow.
we got along fine. He'd been doing this longer than I had and had figured out how to like navigate that in a way to where it wasn't really a problem for him. The
Mm.
other people, whenever they'd come talk to me, like they'd come talk to the guy next to me, and they would be talking about stuff that wasn't work related or wasn't important in my eyes, and I'd put on my headphones and I'd focus on my work because that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to
Mm.
work.
Mm.
And what I couldn't really wrap my head around is that part of getting along with the team was
Mm.
having those conversations. And I was like,
Mm.
what? Like looking back, it's like you wanted me to not do this work that I've
Yeah.
got so much to do to
Yeah.
talk to you about nothing. Like if he'd come up to me and talk to me about like one of the guys had some his dad was sick, I would have talked to him about that all day long. It's like, yeah,
Mm.
I want to care about you, but I don't want to talk about the weather. I don't want to talk about what you did this past week, and I've got too much work to do.
Mm. Mm.
And yeah, that's something that was pretty indicative of ADHD. I came to find out is that you don't like to engage in pleasantries. Like
Mm.
that's something that you don't have a lot of patience for.
Mm.
And then the other part of it that was really important is that in all my relationships leading up to that, emotional regulation had been problematic, and that's something I didn't know how to do with ADHD. Is like I used to have really, really, really ragey anger when I was in high school, and that is something that is extremely indicative of ADHD.
Mm.
I got better about raging out most of the time, but I would get really sad over things that shouldn't make you that sad, and I'd get really upset about something that is like it's really not that big of a deal, and I would like spin out over it. And I didn't realize is because emotional regulation is hard for a lot of people with ADHD.
Mm.
Once I learned that, I was like, okay, you have to stop taking everything so seriously. Some things, it's okay to just like, okay, that happened. I gotta let it go. You know, it's just being aware of it was really important. And I had no idea. But by the time I made all these corrections, or made all these connections, I'd already kind of made my bed at that point, and
Mm.
it was pretty late to fix it. And also, that was okay because whenever I was my authentic self, I still didn't really mesh with those guys. And so I still was not really in a place where I was happy, but I could have left a little further down the road in which I would have been more secure financially and, been able to
Mm.
make some better decisions.
So, you're mentioning about emotional regulation. So it got me thinking about how does emotional intelligence work for someone that has ADHD? Like, what does that look like?
So I think that's a really good question. Is it's so much easier to apply emotional intelligence to somebody else's situation. Like I can see where it's important for other relationships, for other people towards other people. Like I'm like an assassin picking off those things. whenever it comes to turning it inward and seeing how my emotional regulation and my emotional intelligence affects others, there's like a big blank spot. And so like I have to like make sure to take extra time and be like really separated from things that are emotional to me before I react on them, because I'm not going to put myself through that same process that I would somebody else's, where I'm like, oh, well, obviously you need to do this thing.
Mm.
Like the way that my brain works is like, I like literally will figure out somebody else's problem within 15, 30 seconds. Be like, yeah, if you did this, this, and this, then you guys would both be happy. And they're like, oh, wow, yeah, like that's a great idea. But then my wife and I will fight about the simplest things that there is an obvious solution to. And I know that. And I'm like, why don't you just listen to what you said last week to somebody else and apply it to yourself? And it's just,
Yeah.
it's so hard because we're both ADHD and we both have trouble like
Oh, wow.
regulating our emotions. And so when she gets mad, she's super mad at me over something that I'm like, what is the big deal? Like, why are you so upset? And then vice versa. Then we're both like, could you just get over it? And it's like, no, I can't just get over it. That's not how my brain works. But then we just get over it eventually, and we, try to talk about it. And I think it's really like open communication is such an important part of it with anybody, but with ADHD especially. You have to say, like, hey, that thing happened. I'm really sorry about how I reacted to it, but here's the process I went through. How can I be better next time? And it's just continued practice and implementation of that same thing, which in a relationship can get monotonous. My wife does not love that I'm not perfect yet, but she understands that I'm growing, and I understand that she's growing as well. We both can get really upset with ourselves or with each other that they're not growing fast enough because we're impatient. We're like, well, be better now. And then we both step back from that and say, that's not fair.
I think that is a common theme, whether you have ADHD or not, because I'm sure my wife would love me to be perfect, even though I'm not. So
I think the difference is the amount of screaming that goes in the conversation, because we can't turn down our level of anger about the situation like other people can, which is super fun for our kids. My oldest daughter just was like, well, I guess I'm going to the bedroom and put my headphones on. And we have to apologize to her. I was like, I'm sorry. Like, we're both working on being better people at, regulating our emotions, and we know it affects you negatively, and we're sorry. But that's me being an authentic parent, is that I have to take it on the chin and go apologize that it affected them, and be open with them that I'm a work in progress. Like we don't fully hide it for our kids. We try not to fight in front of them, but we don't hide it from them completely, because it's important to know for them that their parents are human. Like our emotions are raw at times too. It's not just the 13, 14-year-old who has, raw emotions. Like it happens for us all the time. So be nice, please.
I think that's so important, and thank you so much for sharing with me about that, because it's one of those things that you hear about, like neurodiversity and things like that, but it's not something that is close to me, if that makes sense. It's not something that I've really been able to ask questions about or understand too much. So I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would share it with anybody who asked, because I want to create bridges for people to understand people better. And I don't feel like I have a lot of space to do that with neurotypical people, because I have generally pushed those people away in my life because they wanted to do the dance that I hated. They wanted to talk about all those little, silly things. And I was just like, ew. And by this time, once I learned that that's a normal thing to do, those people are all gone whom I was, I enjoyed. It's like, oh, well, I didn't mean to push you away like that, but now I see why I did. Like, I get it. It wasn't you, it was me. And that's okay. Like, that's all right. I'll do better.
And I feel like that's where authenticity and openness and inclusivity all kind of come together, because I shouldn't be offended by the fact that you don't want to talk about some of the small talk things that I might want to talk about, and you should be able to express that to me. And this is where I think kindness also comes into it, right? In terms of, how do you express that to me? How do I receive that from you with grace? So I think all of those things kind of come together to create a better environment where you can actually tell me, hey dude, like I actually really do care about you, but I don't care about the weather. I would love to talk about what's going on with you on the inside, and open up
Yes.
some of those conversations. And I won't be like, oh, how dare you tell me that you don't do it, I think that that's really
Hmm.
important.
Yeah, I completely agree.
What are some of the tips and the processes that you go through with people to help them become more authentic in their leadership?
So the I'll go, my number one process is going through what I call the principles of authentic leadership, and
Okay.
that's taking them to leadership school. So leadership school stands for, it's school, self-awareness, consistency, humility, open communication, observance, and love. Like
Wow.
if you can lead with those five things, you are going to make a huge difference in this world. Like it's a whole workshop, so I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but obviously self-awareness, putting yourself on the under the microscope first. Like you want to put yourself first, but not like in traditional sense. You want to put yourself first under the microscope.
Yeah.
So look at your weaknesses, look at how you're um, taking in situations. Make sure you're removing any feedback from the communication model. So you're really looking at your team for what they are. Consistency, always, like you're not gonna have the same reaction to every situation, but always approach the way you handle those situations with consistency.
Mm.
So if somebody comes to me and tells me like they messed up, there's like I accidentally canceled the website or whatever, made this huge mistake. I might get angry, I might not, but the way that I follow through in that situation needs to be consistent. They
Love
need to
that.
know that I'm always, if I get angry or whatever, I'm going to come back to them and say, hey, I'm sorry that I reacted this way to this situation. I'm open to you letting me know about mistakes. That's the only way we can get better. So
Mm.
I'm sorry that I responded that way. Let's move forward with this, and this, so we can do better on that thing that we messed up on. Because
Mm.
it's our team's mistake. So let's go fix it, right?
Mm.
And I want to be consistent in that always. Like I don't ever want to think that my team doesn't know what they're going to expect from me whenever a thing happens.
Mm.
So I
Mm.
think that's really important. Humility, and that is really just assuming that you are the weakest link of your team. Like really just look at yourself as, I am a servant to this team. I want to do the best that I possibly can. Other people have great skills. Let me be the first one to utilize them and let them help me be a stronger person and
Mm.
leader moving forward.
Mm.
Open communication, like I said, you have to have a real open door policy. It can't just be, yeah, you can come talk to me anytime you need to. And then you're like stern faced, like somebody you don't want to share things with because you're scary. You have
Mm.
to go both ways. It's not just open door, it's going out into your team's space and like actually communicating with them. Like
Mm.
you have to create a space where it's comfortable to talk to you, not just where you have to come to you when something goes wrong,
Mm.
right? You
Mm.
want to be an actual person to your team, not just
Mm.
not the man behind the what is it? The man behind the Wizard of Oz? Now I can't remember it. But the man behind the curtain? Yeah, not just the man
Mm.
behind the curtain.
Mm.
And then observance, and that observance is twofold. It's one, being respectful both ways to your team, like respecting their ability, respecting the way that you talk to them, like being respectful and kind in the way that you interact with each other, and also pay attention.
Mm.
Like pay attention. Like you
Mm.
have to be a good leader. You have to pay attention to what's going on with your team, to what's going on with the different situations that your team are interacting with. You should always be watching.
Mm.
And what I think is really important about that is catch your team doing things right. Like let
Oh.
little small stuff go, but if it's a positive thing, catch them
Mm.
doing right and praise
Wow.
them. Like praise them often. I think it's such an important thing that people overlook is the small stuff that people do every day
Mm.
correctly.
Mm.
Like, for example, Anne does TPS reports, turns them in 3 times a week. They're always on time. They're always done correctly. And because it's done so often and it's such a
Mm.
regular thing, it gets forgotten that certain parts of the company can't run without these reports being done. Like, sales can't run their reports because of TPS reports, whatever TPS reports actually are, like they can't, they serve a function and they're being done for a reason. So something I suggest is 2 or 3 times a week, call somebody out for doing their regular thing great. So people get used to being praised for loving the process. Like, I think we all get so focused on the result of a thing that there's this whole process that is full of different tiny results that if you praise them to where people love being part of that process, the result will always be great. It may not work the first time, second time, or the third time. That process is going to do its job, and people are going to love doing the process because you said, hey, Ann, for this week, every time I've gotten your TPS reports, they've been perfect. You turned them in on time, and I appreciate you so much. Here's a $15 gift card to Starbucks. Like, I just want to appreciate you because I know I can count on you, and I know that this company could not run the way it does without you. You are so important to this team. Thank you. Or, Jeff, I've gotten 3 compliments on the way you answer the phones this week because you're so kind and people love hearing your voice whenever you answer. Like, pick a day next week and I'll take you to lunch. Something like that. It's like, those are simple things, but that's what makes something special is the accumulation of all those simple things. If everybody's doing their simple things well, all of a sudden you've got an amazing team, right? And if you are appreciating those simple things, then people they enjoy doing them. Like, I used to not really, I just did this mindlessly, but now it's like I look forward to doing these reports because I know that my boss loves when he gets them. Like, that's exciting. Like, create excitement for your team. And lastly, love. Like, lead with your heart first. Take the time to get to know your people and care about them. Like, if you really put yourself out there, lead with your heart, people they're gonna feel it and they're gonna want to work for you. I only had very few opportunities to work with somebody who actually loved the people that worked under them. And when I did, it felt so different. It felt like I was a part of something special. And if you can foster that kind of feeling, why would you not want to lead that way?
That's amazing. I absolutely love that. Lead with your heart. I think that's so important. So important. So thank you so much for being on the podcast, for sharing your journey and your thoughts. Like, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Would you mind just telling everyone where they can connect with you as we close?
Absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn at Bruce Alexander, or you can find my business page at Authentic Identity Management on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at Authentic Identity Management. You can also find my podcast on all platforms, and that is Authentic on Air with Bruce Alexander. I would love for you to check it out and listen in. You can also find me on YouTube at Authentic Bruce, and we've got lots of podcast video there. And I'm going to start putting little tips and clips like the stuff we just talked about today. I'm going to start putting that kind of stuff up as well.
Yeah, I think that school thing is awesome. So I'd love to watch a short video about that. Bruce, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, sir. I really enjoyed it. It's been a great experience.
My pleasure. And thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Dunamis EQ Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, flick through our channel and there's loads more that you can watch. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you can hear first when new episodes drop. We'll catch you on the next episode.